Welcome to Generation Digital Workforce, the podcast that's here to explore the role of robotic process automation and other digital technologies. Whether you're just getting started or you're looking for advanced strategies and tactics, if you're curious about where human and digital workers are coming together to transform the future of work, then this podcast is for you. All right, let's get into the show.
Welcome everyone this week to Generation Digital Workforce. I'm very pleased to welcome back to the show today, Matt Parsons and Mark Shivers. They've joined us before to talk about our robotic operating model and executive support for intelligent process automation. Welcome back today, guys.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Thanks, Vina.
Good to be back.
Great. I understand that you have brought a colleague from Bizaji with you so that we can delve into workflow and RPA and why these two products make such a great solution when paired together.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Vina. I brought Ed Gower here, and he's a resident expert in the BPM and workflow industry working for Bizaji. But Ed, why don't you give yourself an introduction? I can't do that justice. Definitely in a better position than I am.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the intro. Hi. So I am at, as we mentioned, Bizaji. So I lead our solutions team. And what we do is we work with our customers and with prospective customers to really help them understand what value we can bring, centered around specific use cases, centered around objectives that they're looking to achieve, but also help them understand kind of that crawl, walk, run path to adoption of the technology that helps orchestrate processes, which we'll get into a little bit more detail on this call.
That's awesome. Thanks, Ed. I told you I couldn't do that justice, and I don't have the accent you do, and it always sounds better, I think, coming from your accent. So I wish you could do mine next time. Thanks, Zena. So Zena, do you want me to just dive into the topic here around workflow and RPA? Because I think we have the masterminds here in two technologies that I think create what we consider the perfect marriage in the intelligent process automation space. So what do you think?
Yeah, I'd love you to do that, Mark. And if you could take it from the spin of a customer's perspective, that would be great for our listeners.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think the examples here are gonna really, no pun intended, ignite the conversation. So from workflow and RPA, I think if we're talking about two different technologies in the intelligent automation space, why don't we start with defining them? So, Matt, maybe if I ask you, if you can define, when we talk about RPA or robotic process automation, how would you define it, in the space where, these are just buzzwords right now, really make it real for the listeners here?
Yeah, thanks for that, Mark. With robotic process automation is really something that's kind of come about over the last 5 years. It's not something you've already been digging into, or living it like I have for the last almost 10 years before it was even called robotic process automation. But ultimately, it's really software robot employees. I mean, and these software robot employees or digital workers can be programmed to execute business tasks or whatever type of work humans are traditionally doing in a digital environment. And so it can initiate system-based tasks just like a human could. They can also work with people, kind of within a human in the loop is what they call it type scenario, where you have digital workers working arm in arm with human workers. But once you do configure these digital workers, they can execute and run and do work exponentially faster with 100% accuracy, all following a defined set of rules. And I think that's important to understand, that these aren't intelligent digital workers. These are RPA really is a rules-based approach to automation. And so these digital workers only do exactly what they're programmed to do when they're programmed to do it. And that's what, that's really the best way I can think of describing RPA.
Yeah, that's great. So it kind of fits in the integration space, right? And,
yes.
Helps attach, systems together, right? To really manage the integration of data between systems or actors, right?
Yes, that's a really good way of putting it. Absolutely.
Okay, cool. So then Ed, I mean, I think I get the RPA space, right? From a listener's perspective, how would you then now describe the role of workflow BPM, which stands for business process management? How would you describe that discipline in an intelligent automation space?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's always good to think of it in terms of a use case. And we think of it in terms of a process, but that process isn't necessarily an abstract thing. It's something which, for example, HR onboarding you're onboarding a new employee, there are many things that have to happen during that overall process. There's the whole hiring process, there's the actual offer piece, there's enabling that person to work, issuing them with all the right security credentials and everything, issuing domain accounts, getting set up for benefits. And those tasks in and of themselves are typically handled by discrete applications or processes within an organization. And those discrete applications are fantastic and do a really good job at what they're designed to do. But they're not typically designed around that overall end-to-end process. They don't have an ability to see kind of that 20,000-foot view of what do we actually do to onboard an employee end-to-end. So where a solution such as Bazagi's come in is that it allows us to, first of all, understand and model that end-to-end process and apply specific automation tasks to it to help us give a much better user experience to both the new employee in this example, as well as within the organization too. So really, I think about it as the orchestration of all of those things together to create a user workflow or a process which is managed really kind of from the outside in rather than from those individual application stacks outward. And RPA is a critical aspect of that, right? That end-to-end process can't ever be as seamless or as automated as it can be without the solutions that, for example, that Blue Prism provide.
So to break it down, you're sitting alongside of these like core workhorse applications, right? Or above these core workhorse applications set to manage, let's say, a single line of business task or a single shared service task, yet giving the view from a company perspective, right? Like a common dashboard, a common work queue, somewhere to centralize the activities of an entire company as opposed to solving a specific business problem, right?
Yeah.
Is that a way of like kind of breaking it down?
Yeah, absolutely.
So then help me understand, because you said RPA is an integral part. So it sounds like you're on top of the organization orchestrating a process across multiple applications. And Matt mentioned before he was integrating the elements between multiple applications. I'm assuming that when you're going after an integration, you could obviously go after, let's say, an API or a microservice. But do you ever find there's gaps in that strategy where you might not have access right away to get at the data, or maybe it's not an internal system? Am I right in assuming that's where you're plugging in RPA?
Yeah, absolutely.
You can help me understand that.
Yeah, and there may even be, so very rarely will that entire application stack actually have a user-friendly API way of accessing the data or enriching that data. So there are many competing priorities, for example, within an IT group. So being able to quickly get to that data, to be able to leverage it and then supplement it and pass that on in the process to the next step that needs it is something which isn't always very easily done without RPA. And those could be email communications where information is passed from one person to the next. They could even be paper-based information read from forms directly. And that's something that in order to make that part of an overall process, you need to be able to leverage and enrich and pass on that data to the next stage in the process. So RPA is definitely an integral part of that, and it helps tremendously to really kind of get that hook in, if you will, to that data. The other part where it really helps tremendously for us is that organizations have many competing priorities, and there are many requirements that, always way too many than they can actually fulfill. So sometimes, even though there may be an API available, the actual value for that organization to develop and build on top of that doesn't quantify the end result. So us being able to leverage it to fill in perhaps where there potentially is an RPA, but time doesn't allow for us to leverage it, is also an area that we find great value in from an RPA solution.
Yeah, and a number of our clients, Ignite RPA, when we start implementing workflow alone produces quite a bit of value from an orchestration perspective. It helps manage the process. It gives management data about the process, and it actually helps in the re-engineering work as well. And more often than not, the business is saying, I can use workflow or I can use email. Give me something in this workflow implementation that I can't get in my normal day-to-day environment, right? That's when integrations come to play. So that, Ed, is exactly where, some organizations struggle when they implement workflow with the enhancement of RPA. It gives them almost a green pasture to say, if you would like to do data enrichment in an upstream system, or even go outside of our organization, or if you'd like that email integration, introduce RPA, and even if your technology team can't integrate or can't align to the schedule of the workflow program, it doesn't stop you dead in your tracks. What it does is it gives you that capability, whether it's, we call it stractical. It's part strategic sometimes, part tactical other times, right? Even if it's just playing that gap between when you can fulfill the API requirements and when you need them. RPA, I've seen, is an integral part of that workflow strategy, just really to prevent you from having to, create this multidiscipline, multi-year technology plan with organizations outside of the workflow team to get what the client actually needs. I've seen RPA take workflow strategy to new heights in many instances.
There's also an abstraction that a BPM solution such as Bizargy provides, which does mean that we don't have to expose whatever those underlying capabilities are. So it's often a very easy way for customers to see value and to adopt a technology very quickly and refine those integrations and build them over time without affecting the overall user experience or the interface which they leverage, because the plugin to the system itself is abstracted from that end user. So the source of the data can evolve and change over time without actually affecting that end user's value they derive from the application.
That's a great point. I mean, that's around standardization, because a lot of what workflow does is helps the business standardize the process. And obviously it allows for exceptions and, alternatives based on region or whatever, client profile, whatever the business exception process dictates. But it does standardize around the happy path and the exception path, which always enhances the automation potential in an organization, right? So if we're now taking a different view, right? So we started with workflow and the enhancements of RPA. Matt, let me ask you this from the RPA angle. Starting with RPA, how does workflow enhance that RPA journey?
Well, I think the way that workflow can really enhance it is, I go back to one of the statistics that I heard because it was kind of, feeds into some of the things we were talking about previously, but that, 90% of the average organization, 90% of the applications don't have APIs. And I think that's obviously going to be a lot better as new technologies are implemented, but that's really, there's so many processes that I've heard working with workflow teams that have brought Blue Prism in to leverage RPA that, that we have a laundry list of processes and workflows that we really wanted to implement, but the time and effort to do it, and this kind of leads to what you were saying, it was too great to custom code an API for an application that was homegrown, for instance. But, as I said, using Blue Prism to interact with the user interface, you can expose all that information without having to do any database integrations or anything along those lines. So you avoid governance issues with SOX, compliance, and other things. So it really does kind of make it more of an extension to do larger end-to-end automation. And I think things that RPA doesn't do well today, case management, and delivering all of the different business workflows as it should go. And I think also, determining how processes should look. A lot of people do, and we'll talk about process discovery and other things and other topics in other podcasts, but, there's so many things you can't achieve without it as well that RPA would benefit from, whether it's running analytics on transactions and things like that, that you're managing between systems that can help you determine, hey, is this an opportunity that could solve a business problem for us today? So I think that it's hard, though, too, because there is kind of a classic chicken and the egg scenario where, should we use workflow or should we use RPA, and when should it be used? And I think that oftentimes is just so situational for customers. There isn't a clear line that you draw in the sand that says, okay, well, we're going to use RPA for this or we're going to use workflow for that. And so I think, every situation could be different for the customer, but being able to bring data that wouldn't have been available to the workflow setup in and of itself, I think accelerates the value tremendously. And, if you change applications, you just create a new object and expose that, and then you can plug and play that object into that workflow. So, the agility that you get with RPA for your workflow program really then becomes, unparalleled. And so now the world's your oyster when it comes to reimagining how your business should flow and transforming that. But they're not standalone. Those two together, won't do it all, but they're the foundation.
That's an valued aspect of the integration between workflow and RPA. And a lot of people don't talk about that pipeline identification aspect that workflow brings to an RPA journey, where because of the metrics that you get if you orchestrate your processes across an enterprise correctly using an enterprise workflow tool, those are kind of unparalleled, where usually they're stuck and buried in legacy systems, right? If a company has like 300 to 1,000 legacy systems, to get an end-to-end process through an automation journey, you have to collect metrics across all of them. If you do workflow right, the metrics are at your fingertips and reports probably deep inside the workflow tool. I mean, you can't pull metrics in terms of when a process started and when a process was handed off to the next unit and when a process ended and the touch time in that process using Microsoft Outlook as your workflow tool. So if you invest in a workflow tool, you get a huge pipeline kick from any RPA implementation. And I think that's a great point, Matt, that a lot of people don't recognize, when they're talking about these two technologies in conjunction. I've also heard quite a bit that, RPA is not a technology that ever tries to automate 100% of a process. It's trained to do the manual, mundane, repetitive tasks, but you build exceptions into an RPA implementation for a reason, right? Because you expect exceptions, right? So, have you seen a nice little marriage between RPA and BPM in the exception management aspect of RPA at all, or how does that usually work?
I'm seeing more and more of it now. I think that organizations generally have been kind of, what's hot in the market and let's get this new technology in here. And so I think they already kind of approach it the wrong way in my eyes, but I do think that they're able to, I am seeing it now more. More organizations are understanding that, in order for us to make better sense of what we even do today, we need to have a better understanding of our workflow. And so from an exceptions perspective, it can get really, really complicated with a digital worker because of all the business rules and modeling. But if you're able to manage that within a workflow system and send it to a case management system internally and run the analytics properly and manage those in a ticket system, and do all those things that, you expect from a mature organization that doesn't have bureaucratic process on top of bureaucratic process that almost makes it, makes them run at the speed of a snail, then, those are going to be the types of organizations that are really going to run with this and take it on. But I think we're in a really unique period in time where companies are just now waking up to how important workflow truly is. And I think that workflow, it's almost like they've been shackled a little bit until RPA came about. And so because of all of the enabling that it does within the whole BPM ecosystem. So, I think that's kind of how I would look at it, if that makes sense. And what I've seen so far in the market, it's kind of just now clicking for people who want to tackle intelligent automation.
Yeah, no, I agree. So I want to hit on a point you talked about before, and you and I talk about this all the time. It's the chicken before the egg. I'm kind of a third party here that implements workflow, implements intelligent automation, implements RPA. And I always get asked by my clients, like, what do I do first? So, Ed, when you're asked that, and let's talk about it from the BPM angle, right? When you're like, what do you do first? When you're asked that question, make the case from a workflow perspective, if you can, or really, if it doesn't matter, if it is still a chicken before the egg thing, how do you view that?
Yeah, no, I think it's very important. And then there's never one answer to is it the chicken or the egg, or what do we do first? I think fundamentally understanding the actual process and what the customer is looking to achieve and help them understand what good actually looks. What we would start with in that scenario is actually providing with both a high-level business and technical model of exactly what the world looks like today. And that doesn't need to take hours or days or weeks to actually evaluate. You usually get to a pretty understanding that quickly just by getting people talking to each other cross-functionally across the organization, across these different silos that this process has to be orchestrated across, and understanding where some of the challenges are and where some of the issues are, and then looking to see what the ultimate end state should be. What are we looking to achieve from this? And then how do we get there? Is this something that we can look to tackle in one go, or do we want to incrementally get towards that end state based on the complexity, the size, the scale of the problem that we're addressing? So I think regardless of whether you start with a BPM or an RPA solution first, the first step is to kind of model and understand what that end-to-end process looks like, and not look at things in isolation, because quite honestly, that's where some of the trouble comes with is only operating within those silos specifically. So we do offer a really robust modeling tool which helps us understand that. And on top of that, and something that we've seen customers using tremendously recently, are our simulation capabilities. So what we can do is then take that process and we can run simulations through it and look to replace certain manual aspects in that simulation with a digital worker and see what the impact of that would be to the overall end-to-end process. And what that helps us do is identify the real pivot points and the real weak links, I guess, in that process and help really quantify the value that would come from a BPM solution or an RPA solution individually. I think that to generalize specifically, what we would look to is we're looking to transform something, which typically would start with more of a BPM first approach, or are we looking at a very specific burning issue or burning problem that we need to solve quickly? But I don't think there is one approach like there is in life in general that solves all problems. So I think we have to look at it from a process-oriented perspective and see where the weak links are.
Yeah, wouldn't it be better if there was, right, that easy answer?
I think the
clients would like that.
Yeah.
The clients would like that, but I might be out of a job at that point, right? But yeah, the funny part is like there's a lot of consultants out there talking about they've got the answer, they've got the secret sauce. To be honest with you, the only ones I really believe are the ones that say, I don't know. Let me understand your business problem first, and then I'll let you know which one to start with. I mean, I think there's a three-legged stool to the question of where do I start. One is, and it's all around the problems. One is, do I have a data problem? Do I have a process problem? Or do I have an integration problem? Right? That's really the cornerstone behind an intelligent automation journey. I mean, there's so many clients out there that I talk to that are swimming towards the shiny object, and they're saying, machine learning and artificial intelligence, I need to be the first on the block to do that, right? But then you ask them, are your systems integrated? And they don't even have the common identifier that would be required to run business intelligence, not even talking about machine learning or artificial intelligence, right? So when I go into a client, I always start with, I'm usually asked, can I implement AI? Because that's the new kid on the block. And then when I finally get them to a point to understand where their journey should start, it's generally either in the workflow BPM route or, in the integration side, in more of an integrations and RPA route. So, for me, let me know if you guys kind of, you have scenarios like this as well, but I have the tale of two clients I always talk to people about when they ask me this question. Client number one is is an investment management firm who said, I want RPA. Tell me how to implement RPA. I said, fine. We went through a scenario building exercise, looked at some of their processes, and they showed me a process where they receive all of these requests from a transaction perspective into an Outlook inbox, right? And then they had to route those transactions to multiple groups. And these were, variety of different transactions. They couldn't tell me, which transaction was more prevalent, which transaction had more effort applied to it, and it was just it depends answer, right? So we went through almost a 3-hour working session to come out the other end and say, you don't need RPA yet. You need workflow to orchestrate your process so you can get the metrics to tell me where you should put RPA, right? So that was one client. Second client came in and said, large financial institution, and said, I would like workflow. So that's great. I can implement workflow for you. Tell me your problem. So they laid on my big black consulting couch and told me their problems and said, I have this big mainframe and we have transactions that are being processed and we need to better manage them. I need to better triage them and resolve them because they have a lot of exceptions. And okay, somebody could pinpoint workflow as an exception management tool. We dove into the problem and the data was there. It was pretty apparent how many items they were processing, how many exceptions were being produced, what level those exceptions were producing effort, and how many manual steps were taking in the resolution process. And we easily defined an RPA strategy, and we were automating processes. And they didn't need workflow, right? Yet the broader organization, post-exception management, needed workflow, right? So the tale of two clients, one saying they wanted RPA but really needing workflow, one saying they wanted workflow really needing RPA, it's paramount in the industry is that, many people just hear these technologies being thrown around and don't understand why they're being used because they jump into the solution route. When if they take a step back and understand their problems and use somebody who really understands the differences between the two technologies, I think you're in a better position and you're going to waste a lot less money spending time making the right choice. So do you guys have similar examples like that? Or do you kind of, do those examples resonate with you guys?
They resonate very well with me, and I think, like I was saying earlier, I think the market is really waking up, and so, more mature BPM platform, users in general, I think are understanding now the integration and, the extensibility that RPA brings. And I think I'm now seeing this in my customers who finally, built a capability and are driving, some real change. They start running into roadblocks, and there's issues, and it would almost be too difficult to manage that much content between applications and systems and things like that. And so, I think that now they're starting to ask these questions, and it's giving us a chance to educate the clients on, why this is important. And so sometimes like, well, why didn't we start with workflow, or why didn't we know this in the beginning? And I tell them that, I think more importantly, this space is still really new in the grand scheme of things. ERPs have been around for 20 years, 30 years in their current form. And I think that that's really driving a lot of this now, is that people are just starting to really get experience, and they're starting to be in, doing this in the field. And so that really helps, and I think, Mark, you're in a unique position because of doing all of this, 5 years before, 10 years even before this was even a topic, and it was even titled intelligent automation. Y'all were calling it the right thing, but the market didn't even know this really existed, it felt like. And so I almost call this like the great awakening for automation and transformation and the marriage of workflow and RPA. And I think it's going to be different for every single organization, just like Ed said.
I agree, though. I agree, Matt. I think those that have woken up and have decided that, there is no one size fits all in the automation or intelligent automation world. When they hit that plateau with that one investment that they've made, whether it's workflow or RPA or one of the others, when they hit that plateau, if they're smart enough to say, if I am creating an automation toolbox and I have a hammer, if I add a screwdriver, there's a few more projects I can take on, their investment in both technologies grows together. And it's not a one or the other. I do find it funny how when I go into a client and I ask what's their intelligent automation strategy, they talk about one technology. And then I ask about, do they have investments in the other technologies? They're actually split, right? Actually, John over there owns workflow and Sally over here owns RPA, right? Rather than thinking about it as a consistent, automation strategy, because the power of the two technologies together actually helps both grow.
I absolutely agree. I think it's pretty clear now. And, I think what's interesting is that, a lot of organizations that I'm starting to find, it's almost kind of that you have one or the other. Very, very few am I engaging with where, if they have a huge workflow business, maybe they dabble more in like desktop automation at first and things like that. But I am seeing now that they're taking this seriously. But, oftentimes there are many large organizations that it's quite baffling that there isn't any workflow strategy of any kind that exists, and so I think, going in with customers and, to your point, understanding the problem that they have versus trying to prescribe or just, show off features and functionality is going to be the most successful way. And that's kind of always been the way with consulting in general, outside of, what we're talking about here. But oftentimes, people get stuck in that world of selling, a product and not solving a solution. And I think that's really, or solving a problem. And I think that's probably the most exciting thing about this for me, is that I've kind of gone through that great awakening in the last 6 to 12 months. And it's how do we tell this story in a way that organizations who have always thought that there's always a silver bullet for a single problem. We need better customer relation management, so we got to buy Salesforce. We need, whatever the scenario is, it's a one solution solves the problem. And intelligent automation, to your point, you will never succeed with it if you operate and live in silos. I have a lot of clients who have dabbling in awesome AI and machine learning stuff, which is still in its infancy, and they have a robust data science team, and that group doesn't even communicate or talk to the RPA COE. And then they have a workflow instance in one line of business, and they're barely using it. So I'm like, you have all the tools that you need right here. to, accelerate and hit the ground running, but you've siloed these capabilities that really all should be under one umbrella. And I think that's probably what we're going to see. So.
Yeah, great. I can't agree more. So Ed, any closing remarks? And I know Dina has a question for you probably before we sign off, but any closing remarks on the topic?
Yeah, I think that taking that kind of process-driven approach, looking at what your customer expects that process to look like, whether they be internal or external, and thinking about it from an end-to-end perspective is always a good starting point. And from there, what we can then do is help identify within that process specific issues that could benefit an overall orchestration and process automation solution, or specific point solutions around some kind of RPA solution as well. And I think that the two do work very closely together, very, very much hand in hand. And I think the customers that leverage both and grow with both over time are the ones that derive the most value from each of them individually.
That's what it's all about, value. Amen. So, Dina, do you have any question for Ed?
I did want to add one more thing before we jump from that.
Sure.
I think that the workflow and RPA, there are a lot of mid-sized companies that I think are a little more agile who are getting this sooner rather than later. And I think what we're going to see is, we're going to see in 5 to 10 years, the companies that took the foundational aspects of their automation ecosystem seriously, and they're going to be the new Goliaths in their industry and in their market because they grew lean and were able to adapt and keep costs down and be viable in the market, and I think that we're going to see some of these large companies just kind of disappear because they just didn't take the right approaches, and they almost they processed themselves out of business, if that makes sense, where there's just too much process and there's not enough flow in their business. So I'm excited to kind of see how that plays out and what companies take advantage of this and lead the markets in the future.
It's a great statement. I want to write that down.
Thank you. Thank you for that addition, Matt. Mark, Matt, and Ed, thank you so much for joining the program today. I really appreciate your insights into how workflow and RPA work together to deliver even more value. And I love this chicken and egg, not knowing where to start. But in this case, it doesn't matter where you start, as long as you find the friend along the way. It sounds like you'll be successful. So thank you so much for joining us today, listeners. Be sure and subscribe to Generation Digital Workforce so you never miss a new episode.
You've been listening to Generation Digital Workforce. If you want to hear more about RPA, AI, and other cognitive technologies that are shaping the future of work, join us next time as we continue to go deeper on these topics with industry innovators and experts. To make sure you never miss a future episode, subscribe to the show in your favorite podcast player. And if you've liked what you heard today, please leave us a review. It's one of the best ways to help more people find valuable content. For show notes and more info, visit us at blueprism.com/podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.